Hi, I'm back with another video. So this is a continuation of my back to school series. And this video is back to school tips for disabled students. So I did one for trans students and I'm doing one for disabled students because I am both and I have insight on both. So let's get started. Okay, so like I did last time, I'm going to start with high school and then I'll go to college. And high school is kind of saying like high school and middle school and elementary school. Like if you're watching this and you have a kid who's in elementary school or middle school, or if you're in middle school and you're watching this, I don't really know how old you are. Anyway, sorry for rambling. So the first thing that's important in being a disabled student in a public, high, or private high school, middle school, elementary school is getting a 504 or IEP. A 504 is under, both of these are under the IDEA Act, which was passed in the late 60s by Lyndon Johnson. Wow, I'm learning things because I took a politics of education class last semester. Now I'm very well versed on this. Anyway, an IEP is an individualized education plan, which provides for bigger accommodations, like testing accommodations, building accommodations if you're physically disabled. Sorry, hold on one second. This will be cut out. Oh. Such bad allergies. Anyway, physically disabled students, like building accommodations, hearing impaired students accommodations, other things like that. A 504 is smaller. It usually is more just for testing accommodations and other smaller type things. So a 504 is easier to get than a IEP, but both of these involve talking to your guidance counselor. Now, like I said in my last video, not everybody has a guidance counselor, which I know is really stupid and because of budget cuts, but if you don't have a guidance counselor, the best thing to do is go to your Department of Education. Unfortunately, in New York City, the Department of Education is big and bureaucratic and kind of sucks. And you know, that's the way it is. When I had an IEP in middle and high school, and I think elementary school too, although I lived in a different city, so that was different. But, what was I saying? Oh, but we went to the Department of Education to get the IEP, and it was just took forever. We were sitting there forever. We had to go through like a billion different steps, and it took like a year to get it finalized. A 504 is easier. I don't think you have to go through all the steps that you do. Like when I got an IEP, I had to take a bunch of tests that like proved that I needed the IEP, and that I also had to meet with like a panel of experts or whatever. It was really weird. I don't know exactly if that's the standard procedure, if that's New York City's procedure, but yeah, so it takes a really long time. A 504 is great for starting out for something, or it's great for if you really just need the testing accommodations. Now, that's having the IEP in the 504 doesn't mean that they're going to use it. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's true. Just like for trans students, having Title IX doesn't mean that they're going to follow it. Having an IEP or a 504 doesn't mean that they're going to follow that either. So you really have to be diligent in following up with your school and saying, hey, I have this IEP, I have this 504, like you have to follow it. You have to do the things. Like that's just the way it is. And, you know, it's hard. It's really hard. And especially if you go to a school that doesn't have a special ed program or doesn't have a lot of students who have disabilities, it can be even harder. Now, in my high school, it was hard for students that I knew to do that because we were a small school and we did not have that many students with disabilities. Now, I want to clarify something here. I was not diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos when I was in high school. I was not using a wheelchair. I was not using any type of mobility device other than like for a few months in the 11th grade when I had a flare. But really I wasn't physically disabled in high school. I had an IEP because I have anxiety, and that contributed to some type of, learning disability. But honestly, like, my IEP wasn't really even needed. In elementary school, I was in a resource room, which is what they called like special ed, like takeout time, which was basically like, so I was mainstream for some classes and then in resource room for other classes, like math. And the reason for this is because of my standardized test scores. They had a huge discrepancy between reading and math. And this has nothing to do with any kind of learning disability that I really have. It's just that I'm really bad at math. Like, horrible at math. But, like, that was just the way it was. I didn't really need any of that stuff. And I really didn't need the extra time that they gave me in high school either. And eventually my IEP lapsed and we never renewed it. But I just didn't need it. And I don't need it now. So I just wanted to clarify that. So I don't really have a lot of experience with physical disability accommodations in high school, although I did was able to get elevator passes and accommodations for gym in high school when I did have a flare. Fortunately, in high school, I only had one flare my entire high school experience, and that was weird because now I'm in a constant flare. But I don't know. In middle school, I had a really serious knee injury, and I was on crutches for 6 months, and my middle school was even smaller than my high school, so getting accommodations was like a weird process that doesn't really make any sense to anyone who didn't go to a school that had 35 kids in it. But yeah, so sorry for a little ramble, but I just wanted to let you know that was my experience. But I do know a little bit about physical accommodations in high schools and middle schools and such. In public school, it's pretty easy, honestly, because they have standard procedures that school districts lay out and that the government lays out. In a private school, it's harder because there are no real standard procedures, and probably if you go to a high school or a middle school, like a private high school or middle school that doesn't have a special ed program, that doesn't have anyone with a physical disability. I know that the school I went to had very, very, very few students with physical disabilities. In fact, I only knew one student, and she was very proactive about it, and she was very passionate, and so like that was her kind of thing. But if you go to a school like that, it's harder. You have to really convince your school that you need this accommodation, that this is who you are, this is what you're doing. And being in mainstream when you have a physical disability is hard. I know it's hard because I've seen people struggle with that in private and public schools. Not in my school per se, but in general. And because people will try to say that, you need ABC or you need to do ABCD when you really don't. So, I mean, those are the really big things. I think the biggest thing in a public or private school, regardless, is having a 504 or IEP. So if you have that, the biggest thing you have to do with it is just implement it and impress your school. And that's a big thing to do regardless of whatever you're trying to get accomplished, whether you're trans or cis or disabled or able-bodied. If you need something from your school, you gotta press really hard. So I'm gonna go on to college because that's where I have the most experience. I became really sick last year, and my physical accommodations became, something that I really had to fight for. So I guess I'll start with housing. Most schools have a housing policy for disabled students. So my school says, like, if you're a disabled student, we are required to provide you with adequate housing that's accessible to you. And that means like putting you in a building with an elevator or on the first floor. It means putting you in a building that has an accessible bathroom, you know, something like that. The thing about my school is, though, that they don't let you pick where you live if you have a disability, and you also don't get to choose who you live with until after everybody else is chosen. So what happened to me this year was that, like, I didn't get to choose where I lived, so I ended up in the same building, which isn't that bad, but I'll tell you a story about that in a second. And then after everybody else had chosen, they asked me if I wanted to, who I wanted to live with, but all my friends were already roomed up. So I get to have a random roommate, and that's fine with me, but as a trans person, having a random roommate is not always the best thing, and having to come out and explain to some random person about your identity is not always the best thing. If you're not trans, that's fine, but like it's still a little hard, I think, to have a random roommate. So that's how the rooming thing went. Last year, I had a really great roommate. She took me to the hospital. I think that that's something that I, you know, really appreciated, and something that I also think about with a roommate is, like, can they really accommodate you? Can they understand your illness or your disability? Can they be there in an emergency? Because I have emergencies, and I need people to be there for me. And well, I was in the hospital three times last year during a school, you know, thing, and I had 3 different friends who were kind enough to pick me up and take me to the hospital, and without them, I really wouldn't know what to do, because they're an amazing, they're actually 4. They're all amazing people. If you're watching this, I love you. But anyway, so having a random roommate can be hard if you don't know whether or not they're going to be accommodating to that type of a thing. The second thing is that my building last year, I lived on the 4th floor, and we had elevators. But one night, I got home because I had been out, and both of the elevators were broken. Both of them. I don't know how, why, when it happened, but it did. And I couldn't get to my room. Just couldn't get there. So I had to have my RA go to my room and get some stuff, and then I went to somebody else's room in a different building and stayed with them for the night. And I was basically locked out of my room for almost 24 hours. And that was one of the most frustrating things that actually happened to me last year, I think, because there was nothing I could do. I don't know how to fix the elevators. They kept calling maintenance and nobody answered. My RA kept apologizing to me, and I totally understood that because, you know, he was so nice about it. But still, like, it was just the most frustrating, annoying thing I've had happen to me. So that's housing. Other physical accommodations. So my school has a bus that runs around the town where our school is, because we're basically in the middle of nowhere, and if you don't have a car, you can't really get anywhere. So, you know, we have a bus, but that bus isn't accessible, and I didn't know that until I got to the school. And okay, so a little bit of story time. So our school last year over-accepted students and then over-accepted students to the housing program, so we ended up living in a hotel for a period of time, and the only way you could get from the hotel to school was on the bus, but I didn't know that the bus was inaccessible, and then a bunch of shit happened, and then that's why I ended up being the first person who moved to campus. But the fact that I could not like literally get to any of my classes was horrible, and I felt like made a bad impression for me on my professors those first few weeks. But the bus isn't accessible, so I'm lucky because I can walk a tiny bit, and I have friends who can carry me, and I just keep saying this, but having friends who are really like committed and accommodating is like, I think, the most important thing, whether you're in high school or college or any other grade, because those friends will help you out and be really awesome, and that's what happened to me. That doesn't make up for the fact that the school has done some things that are wrong, like the elevators and the buses, but I can still get on the bus because I have friends who help me, and I'm really lucky for that. So that's the bus. My campus itself is pretty inaccessible. There are a lot of hills, there are a lot of doors that don't work, there are a lot of other things that are just stupid. Not every building is accessible, so I have friends who live in a dorm that I cannot access because there's no elevator. And the last thing is testing and intellectual/developmental disability accommodations. My school has an autism mentoring program, which is really, really awesome. It's run by one of my really good friends. We have a club that's in process called Disabled Students Union, so really getting together and fighting for things. And then, 504 still applies in college. So if you have a 504, you can totally get your accommodations in college. And even if you don't have a 504, if you go to your college's disability services office and explain to them, they'll probably be accommodating, although that's not always the case because some disability services office are really, really awful. Sorry, I'm talking really fast, but my camera's about to die. So I just wanted to give all these tips and tricks and stuff. If you have any more questions, feel free to comment below, and I will link some things down below also. And yeah, I'm really happy to be making these back to school videos. So I will see you next time in my next video. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye! I would say about college is have a form email. Have a form email that says, my name is Emmett, I prefer he, I'm transgender.